books are for sale at the counter, which is in between here and there. So we all have a mission. So I really believe that one of the best things about books is the ability to travel without going anywhere. Now, I'm young and I work in a bookstore, so I can't travel very far or very often. So reading is the best way to be able to sort of broaden out horizons this way. And Carole's memoir is just so incredible because she started off with writing from other people's lives, from other people's points of view. And now for this, her sixth book, it's her own experiences and her own travels outside of this framework of being an interviewer and of telling other people's stories, which is very brave. It's a brave thing to do, to move from I've talked to people about their lives and to this is my life that I'm sharing with you. These are my journeys that I'm sharing with you. So obviously I didn't get to go to the south of France and sail around. And so, yes, one day, life goal. Andy can deal without me for a couple months. She's done it. I haven't. She's going to tell you all about it. You can give her a huge round of applause.
I should probably turn off my phone. That would be exactly what happens, is that little sucker will go off.
Am I in your way at all?
All right, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you so much, Rosie, for having me. I appreciate this a lot because I love coming to different places and different areas. But it was Jonathan Farrell, sitting right back here, who introduced me to Rosie and to this area. And Jonathan I've known him kind of randomly, and he's helped me over the last 10 or 11 years with the different books that I have. And anytime I had some kind of event, he'd pop up and say, is there anything I can do for you? Well, he has. He's done plenty, and I appreciate it. When you're a new author or an author that is not of the big five, you have to work at getting your books out into the world. And so there's like 150,000 new books that hit the market every year, and you have to push yours out to do that. So I appreciate anyone that will open their doors and invite me in. And I just like to talk. We can just sit and have a glass of wine, because that's exactly what I did on all my books. I really wasn't interviewing them, I was just drinking their wine. So anyway, so this book is actually in 3 separate sections. And this is, like I was telling someone, this is the first book that I have done that is just for fun.
Great.
And it really is just almost a romp in the park kind of thing. So the first part of it is kind of following in the footsteps of Peter Mayle. And I don't know if you're familiar with him, but my husband and I, Winston, in the back, and he's been throughout all of my books. Not only is he my book Sherpa, but he is my partner in crime. And so we would go to all these different places together. And so anyways, this is how we decided we were going to find out about Provence. We heard about it, we read about it, we wanted to try it out. We wanted to know, what is the draw? Because everyone wants to go there. What is the magic? And so that's what this book is for me. It's 3 separate trips trying to discern what's the magic. And at every turn, it really is at every turn. So anyway, the first part, of course, Winston and I flew into Nice, and then we met up with my sister and brother-in-law and another couple, and we rented a house up in the mountains, and that was the first trip. And we would go out to all these places to figure out what their food was like, but what's important here. A lot of Roman ruins. We were into that, still are. That was a real big deal. And so each day was kind of a, let's go do this, let's go do that. It's also about how people get along when we're traveling, and or not, and it's just the normal routine of flowing down through it and what comes along. So one of the things that I love, so we're sailors, but my favorite thing is actually just to sit on the beach. I love the beach as well. The beaches in Provence were just magical. And so one day we went to the beaches along this is called Along the Bay of San Tropez. Unlike the deep blue for which this French coastline was named, the Côte d'Azur was a soft tinge of blue so pale in color and reflecting such diffuse light that I found myself questioning the very adjective blue. The smooth and recently preened white sandy beach appeared to be a simple extension of the water, a ripple, a sheen, and a glimmer as it stretched its broad body into the Bay of San Tropez. We, the 6 of us, stood on the 10-foot-high seawall of St. Maxime, and as our eyes adjusted to the golden shimmer of light, we panned the coastline, past the marina, the beachside cafes, and around the horseshoe of the bay. In the distance, through a mist of warm coastal fog, we struggled to catch a glimpse of the village of San Tropez, oh so different from the chilly bay we had left in San Francisco. On that June morning, the air felt thick and heavy like a wet beach towel that clung intimately to every part of one's body. An occasional puff of onshore wind swept past without cooling us, but carried a surprising hint of jasmine. As the breeze shifted, an intermingling of aromas rose from sausages, pizzas, pommes frites, and coppertone. Techno music sent its raucous beat into the air as a backdrop to the laughter and the French banter from the sunbathers below us. We were all anxious to join them, but we were not quite prepared. We all plunked down on the seawall to observe the ensuing activity below. None of us was a seasoned traveler, and I was coming to realize we were, as a group, perhaps a trifle naive about foreign places and customs. In fact, over the past few days, it would be an overstatement to say we grasped the basics of the French language, much less the cultural norm. The truth was, we were desperately attempting to translate any and all signs for a little understanding of anything around us. With sweaty fingers pawing through an array of totally useless French dictionaries, 3 of us searched for meaning to the world around us, while 3 kept watch for clues of understanding. I felt especially responsible as I was the one who had answered the sweet little ad in the San Francisco magazine and had swept the others up in the idea of a dream vacation together in the hills of Provence and along the beach. Once we understood that plage was not a bad thing nor a contagious thing, but the word for beach, we sighed with relief and continued to scrutinize the next signs and rules. How does one order a chaise, I wondered out loud, and what terms do we use to order wine or a sandwich, for God's sake? But foremost in my mind was, what is the appropriate beachwear at this apparently semi-nude beach before us? Clearly, I was out of my element. I had only heard of a few such beaches on the fringes of San Francisco Bay, and I had never considered frequenting them, too chilly. Below me, I could see the sprawling beach was cordoned off into businesses, separated from one another by a spectrum of colorful umbrellas and beach chaises, red stars, blue plaids, pink polka dots, and green stripes. Each business was distinguished not only by a specific hue, but also by an exotic name. Canard et Dauphin Plage, the Canal Plage, or Paris Plage, none of which we could translate. Connecting one chaise to another were small tables where, among the sunglasses and tanning lotions, ham beignet, or tuna on a roll, and succulent sausage sandwiches were being placed. And to our amazement, patrons were also being served cool, shimmering wine in crystal glasses, not the regulation paper cups we were used to juggling. Yes, this was a magnificent observation, and promises of soothing relief from the scintillating heat of the June morning. My eyes continued down the beach to the women lounging in their bikini bottoms. Now, you may not know this, as I certainly didn't, but the beaches along the French Riviera are a mix of clothed, semi-nude, and fully nude sunbathing. Why, only a few sandy beach heads away, at San Tropez, stardom came to one Bridget Bardot in this way. So as we sat there dazed by the sun, I got to wondering about whether a girl like me, a bit past my prime, and on vacation for the first time on the Côte d'Azur, well, could I? Would I? I cast a sideways glance at my sister Melody. I knew she had never experienced such things on public beaches. She is older, you see, and crystal clear moments of the two of us skinny dipping in our youth along the Platte River in Nebraska flashed through my mind. But this was different. I was no longer young. This was no private beach, and we were definitely not in Nebraska. And to further my dilemma, the sophistication I had achieved as an adult in colorful California seemed to have slipped below my knee knobs. I noticed the beachside women seemed quite relaxed, wearing only bikini bottoms, and certainly the smile on men's faces around them indicated total acceptance. But for me, well, definitely not. Not with anyone I actually knew around me. It all seemed quite embarrassing. I blanched at the very thought. Again, I glanced at my sister, wondering what she was thinking. I couldn't tell. In fact, our entire entourage remained mute. Nothing. Could we? Would we? The enticing aromas of a nearby food display finally moved us into action. It was lunchtime and we never missed a meal. So while my sister and her husband nonchalantly wandered away from the beach in search of sustenance elsewhere, we two remaining couples marched down to the closest plage. We opted for the green-striped umbrella and chaise, bumbled through our orders for food and wine, and took our turns changing in the bathhouse along the beach. All of us came out in, let's say, modest attire. We were hungry and thirsty, not nudists. It didn't take us long to feel like we could do this thing, sit on a beach along the bay of San Tropez. The sun was warm and the blue-green waters were cool and refreshing. The sandwiches were delectable, although I must confess, I gave my husband a haranguing he didn't deserve. You see, he knows next to no French, so why I thought he'd go up to the booth and order food for us was rather stupid on my part. He marched back to me and presented me with baguette sandwiches. What kind of sandwich did you buy? I asked him nonchalantly. It's where and jambon sandwich, he said proudly. He was so pleased with himself that the shrew in me came out like a banshee. Beware and jambon, I loudly whispered. Fortunately, Bob and Shirley were in the water and didn't hear me. That's what you ordered? You know that's just plain ham and plain butter, don't you? No mustard, not even Grey Poupon, no cheese, not even Velveeta, just plain butter on a thin slice of ham wrapped in a baguette. Oh my. I saw how he wilted at this and realized I had made an issue ugly when it didn't need to be, but believe me, I profusely apologized. Then once I took a bite of my sandwich, I was surprised to find, it's quite delicious. Yes, I confess, food choices are way too important for me and I needed to get a grip. At this point, we were served wine in real glasses while sitting on the beach, and this was a real unexpected treat. Before we knew it, Melody and Dan returned from their midday meal and sauntered. They had gone only a few hours, but we asked them where they had gone, as we knew Melody could not spend time in the sun. After lunch, we mainly wandered the shady paths near the beach, but did venture down to a rivulet that ran into the Mediterranean. I found an interesting pottery piece, she said. So anyway, it goes on. So in retrospect, that first day at the beach became a practice session, as if I was mentally working up to an Olympic event. Nothing was ever verbalized, but my mind was a constant buzz. We returned to this, our favorite beach, a number of days, and none of us attended the cultural extravagance of semi-nude sunbathing. Believe me, I was relieved. But what if I shoved those thoughts aside? So that's... So I'm going to stick with this first. This is the first trip. And I have to tell you that I just became infatuated with the people. And I don't know if you've read or know anything about Marcel Pagnol and his books and his movies, but he embraces, along with Peter Mayle, the people in all their wonder and splendor, and all their not so splendor and wonder. But it's just delightful, and it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. But my husband and I have been reading these books, and if you get a chance to read any of Marcel Pagnol's, do. It's just do before you go back down to Provence. So anyway, this is called the Pizza Wagon family. And this actually was about at the end of our 10 days that we were there with these our folks. And the last of them had gone home, and so my husband and I were just there alone. So, although the sun had dropped behind our 13th century hamlet of Clavier, and Clavier was a little village that we had stayed in, a hint of golden sunlight sent a radiant shaft onto the Provençal village square and across the tiny sidewalk bistro where Winston and I sat. The buildings around us held tight to the heat of the June day, and St. Sylvester's church tower at the end of the square shimmered in the remaining glow. The town square, well, not a square at all, but a minuscule triangle, I kept telling me, was quiet. The only sounds were the dry rattle of leaves on the plane trees, an occasional bark from a passing but sociable dog, people conversing quietly at nearby tables, and accordion music that floated down from the same tinny radio we had heard before from an upper-story window. On occasion, a muted cheer or groan drifted from the local afternoon bowls players that were just around the corner. Chin chin! The murmurings of a toast floated past us. Always chin chin. Cheers. We raised our glasses in automatic response. It was Friday night after all. Suddenly, voices were raised as more people were welcomed into the tiny square. The sound of metal chairs scraping across ancient stones grew louder as patrons pushed back to make room at their ever-expanding tables. The camaraderie was immediate as both men and women embraced and kissed, each and every one, before they sat down to enjoy a communal drink. Even though we had witnessed this customary physical touch here in Provence, we, like shy voyeurs, could only silently observe. As my husband and I, now in a semi-lethargic stupor from the heat of the day and the pastis, continued our observations, the chime of St. Sylvester struck 8 o'clock. Just then, a heavy door slammed shut across the square, and my attention swiveled in that direction. The sharp rasp of a lock sliding into place ricocheted off the nearby buildings as an elderly woman, the owner of the grocery, locked and bolted her store for the evening. She turned, cast a wave across the square, adjusted her scarf, and trudged off down the street. We stared numbly after the old woman, then back into our glasses. A small bowl of olives slid back and forth between us. I slowly mulled over the French phrases the bar owner had uttered earlier. He said, "My wife and I have just opened our bistro this very week. No, I'm sorry, there is no food available. Not quite yet." Suddenly, I sat up straight and shook myself awake. I realized our hope for sustenance had just locked her doors and headed home. Yes, this was the first night my husband and I would be alone in the house since all our house guests had gone, but we still had more days of vacation. And as I recall, after last night's repast, we had no food left in those cupboards. The only thing on the kitchen counter was my lowly shopping list. Oh God, I thought, staring into my drink. Just then we heard a low rumbling sound. A gnashing of gears, a grinding of metal, a mighty roar of an engine. Then around the corner past the church and almost into the square and onto our laps lurched a large white van. Pulling up near our table, a young man leaped from the driver's side of the truck. He quickly raced around to the opposite door and opened it for a young woman, his wife, we surmised. And as she stepped out of the truck, he reached behind her and lifted out a golden-haired child and hoisted her high. The year-old giggled, and the crowd in the square swiveled to their attention toward the joyous sound. Once the door in the back of the truck was opened, the wife disappeared inside with the baby. The young man deftly flung up a paneled window, rolled down a canopy sunscreen, posted a counter up to the window, added a step, and voila, the wagon du pizza was open. Hooray, I said to my husband, my whining has been answered, we've been saved. Indeed, my love, my husband slurred slightly, it's a miracle. Even before the aroma of garlic infused tomato sauces, simmering local sausages, and caramelized onions could permeate the air, townspeople began to flow out of the homes and down the streets. It was as if the Pied Piper had come to town. Immediately, a line formed near the van as each person in turn leaned up to the counter, some on tiptoes, some on the small step, all to place his or her order. As the young wife bent down to take their request, she would chat, then stop and reach for the baby. She carefully lifted the child up and extended her over the counter. Big nose touched tiny nose. Old cheek touched knee. As each person in line kissed and caressed the infant, time seemed to stop. Nothing at that moment took precedence over the gentle acknowledgement of this cherub, the pizza wagon baby. I slowly looked around. It feels like we've slipped into one of Marcel Pagnol's books or his movies, I whispered. Here we become part of one of his scenes, or have we become part of one of his scenes? Just the day before, I'd been busy reading his books when all I needed to do was understand the people of Provence was to spend more time in this little village that we were living in for 10 days. My husband blinked as if to refocus. You're right, my dear, he murmured. It does feel like Pagnol, but perhaps the pastis has gotten the better of us. Maybe you should order a pizza and save us from starvation. In the meantime, I'll order a bottle of wine. His smile was kind, lopsided but kind. I knew he was not eager to negotiate a food line, especially if it meant stringing French words together to accomplish the task. So I nodded, stood up, and was forced to grab the edge of the table. C'est vrai, I said, steadying myself. It's true. I've discovered the dangers of pastis. I giggled and gathered up my own meager snippets of broken French and headed over to join the queue. After a few minutes of scanning the menu for items I might recognize, I glanced over at my husband, who was also perusing a wine menu, the striking bar owner's wife standing patiently by his side. Within moments, I saw her sprint out the back door of the bistro down the street and into the house below. What on earth did he say to that woman? Or better yet, what did my husband order? He speaks even less French than I do. As I calmed myself down, I became aware of the animated banter going on around me. Yes, the locals did acknowledge me. They smiled and nodded their heads. In fact, a few bonsoirs were exchanged, but as much as I would have loved to converse, I knew I would have been reduced to awkward hand gestures, head bobbing, or the inevitable shrug. That's how we talk. They all knew I was an outsider. All villagers knew when outsiders arrived and when they left. I remained silent but smiled boldly. As I finally stepped up to place my order, I too marveled at the beautiful child in the pizza wagon. As a stranger, I hesitated to reach out to the baby, but instead blurted out, "Très jolie." Not certain if that meant jolly or pretty, I figured I may have covered my bases. I had no clue. Just then a beatific smile graced the tiny upturned face as she sat precariously on the counter like a petite princess. In the meantime, her harried parents whirled about their small mobile kitchen. They pounded out the dough, spun it into the air, and adroitly slid it onto the waiting pans while the child giggled with glee. Local olive oils, cheeses, sausage, and olives were sprinkled and layered onto the crust and thrust into the oven. After selecting a pizza, although not certain what I had actually ordered, I stepped back from the line only to see the bar owner's wife trudge back up the hill. Several bottles of wine were now tucked under her arms. I hoped they were not all for us. But then again, my thirst was returning. She disappeared into the bistro while I was swooning with the savory aromas wafting about me. I continued my vigil. Shuffling from one foot to the other, I resumed my post as voyeur. I couldn't help myself. Perhaps my desire to communicate had slipped into visual gear. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly, I watched as people physically reached out to one another. The soft touch, the quick kiss, the gentle embrace. Hailing from a culture that keeps clear personal distances, I rarely had seen such overt intimacies, but to witness a gentleness of spirit within an entire village, once again my mind raced back to the books of Marcel Pagnol. Before I had assumed his delightful characters were fictitious, but could they have sprouted from his own reality? He was born and raised not terribly far from Clavier. Suddenly I felt the presence of his amicable nature about me. I swayed. I had no words, French or otherwise, to describe the sweetness I felt at that moment. After a few more minutes of standing on one foot then the other, waiting and waiting, the villagers finally gathered up their boxes of pizza, bid each other adieu, and returned to their homes. I too picked up our pizza and moved quickly to the table as the heat was burning my fingers through the cardboard box. Hovering over my husband, the bar owner's wife was serenely pouring a bottle of recently retrieved wine. My husband sampled it, beamed up at her, and nodded his head vigorously, because head nodding is the French dialect he knows best. So, I think we're doing okay. So now the second trip that I took, so there's 3 sections in this book, and you get a 3-part. And so the second section was actually a trip that I had taken with 10 other women from Sunnyvale, the Sunnyvale area. And we were on a cooking tour, and it was traditional cooking throughout Provence. And it was, I probably was the one that wanted to learn about cooking the most. The rest were just giddy with the idea of getting out of the country or going shopping. They wanted to go shopping. We were in very remote areas, so there wasn't a lot of shopping to do. But we had the most incredible different experiences, and everywhere we went, it was. I was telling someone earlier that the first one was actually the first cooking class we took was in Arles, and that was in a 1st century Roman stable that had been converted, obviously. And I learned how to cook a number of different dishes that were specific to this area of Provence. And that's what the whole idea is. And the thing about Provence is that it has all of the flavors of Italy as well as the French. So you have the mix of the two, and in fact, for some period of time, Italy owned or ran that part of Provence and back the other way. So you have this wonderful mix of incredible food and flavors. But the thing that I was most intrigued with was the Rhone River, and I could not get over this. It was all about the fact that over 2,000 to 3,000 years before, the Phoenicians had sailed up the Rhone River, and these were the people from Lebanon, and then there were some others that were from these Arab countries, and around the Mediterranean back then. And what they brought with them was the foods that they had, but also their spices and their herbs. And so what they brought to Provence was a melting pot, and literally in the pot, they were sharing these different foods and tastes and flavors, of which had been part of and building what Provence is now. And what they share, it's a lot of tomatoes, it's a lot of garlic, it's a lot of eggplant, it's a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. Everything obviously is right there. It has to be seasonal, it has to be local, and they have a plethora of whatever you want. And so that was part of what I was learning. I also learned some different techniques that were from, oh gosh, what was his name? Nostradamus.
Oh.
And he had actually been born and raised in San Remy, which was just a few, very short, 20 miles or something north of where we were in Arles. And so anyway, you're learning all these different things. And then, but this one was, we've just gone into Arles. We haven't taken a cooking class yet. It's on May Day, which is the first day of May. And in Arles, it's the Le Fête des Gardiens. And this is our Elysian holiday. And I'm with these 10 or 12 other people. And we've just gotten off and my sister is with me. We arrived in Arles in the dappled light of early morning as the sunlight streamed like molten gold through the leaves of the plane trees. It was the first day of our traditional food culinary tour in Provence, when we were promised our first hands-on cooking class. But again, this was to be no ordinary lesson. No. We were in the ancient city of Arles, which holds fast to its history of over 3,000 years. So this class was to include both ancient and medieval recipes. I was ecstatic. From the moment the 12 of us stepped off the bus, my sister Melody and I were swept up a hill with a multitude of festival goers. Many wore 19th century costumes, but at this point I didn't know why. Glancing around me, I searched the sea of backs for my sister and for Lise. And Lise is our fearless leader, and she's the one that speaks French, and we need to follow her. So, for good. Suddenly I felt like we had become part of the running of the bulls, which I've been told does happen in this town, and I needed to stay vigilant. Everyone was pressing us up the hill toward the church, Église Notre-Dame de la Major, where the blessing of the guardians was to take place. Now the guardians are the, kind of like the cowboys from the Camargue, and I'll describe a little bit more of this. It must have been close to the time of the blessing as we were herded quickly up the narrow cobblestone streets. I had no time to take note of what we were passing as the crowd was much too thick, and I was just trying to stay upright. But as we rounded a curve before the Roman arena, I caught sight of men on horseback, the guardians, or the herdsmen of the nearby Camargue region. They sat regally seated atop their pure white horses, dressed in black woolen jackets with bolo ties, black felt hats, and black and white polka dot shirts. They held their heads high. In one hand they clutched the reins of their horse, and the other each carried the traditional ferrère, a silver-pronged trident. This instrument was used to corral their herds of horses and the black longhorn bulls, yes, the same bulls used in bullfights. I know this because I sidled up to Lise, our translator, to catch her explanations over the din of the crowd. For many generations, Lise said, the guardians, these cowboys of the Camargue, have traditionally worked the land and managed their herds near where the Rhone River flows into the Mediterranean. She waved her hand, pointing in a direction over our heads and totally invisible to us. She continued, the Camargue is not far downstream from Arles, and the guardians are very much a part of the Arlesian culture. Lise had mentioned before, and she is French by birth, so we leaned in closer because we wanted to know her explanations. Behind her, I could see women sitting primly on horses in side saddle fashion. I surmised them to be the wives of the guardians, as they too were dressed in vintage costumes. They wore long satin dresses, rich in tones of burgundy, green, or black, and their skirts draped gracefully down the sides of the horses. As other women paraded about, their skirts caught the shimmering light from the morning sun. Lise said, do you see the woman closest to me? We all nodded our heads. Do you see the lace shawl covering her shoulders and the white lace cap covering her hair? Again we nodded and sidled closer. The very style of her cap and shawl, Lise whispered in more subtle tones, indicates the region she's from, along with the wealth of the woman. And as you can see, the antique lace handkerchief, white lace parasol, and her broad smile complete her attire. As if on cue, the woman on horseback turned as if she understood what Lise had said and flashed a dazzling smile over us, a blessing of sorts. Aware of our need for upward and onward movement, Lise coaxed us up the hill farther. Again, I saw a little along the way, as being short of leg has its continued drawbacks. As we cleared another corner, I suddenly heard a cacophony reverberating off the city walls. Laughter, music from the band as it warmed up, children calling to their mothers, men greeting old friends, and the swishing of the long skirts and crinolines from the other Elysian women as they moved quickly up the cobblestone streets. I turned slightly when I heard a call, I think it's Muguet of Aldre. A flower vendor was selling small bouquets of lilies of the valley. Why are they selling lilies of the valley today, I asked Lise. Ah, ma chère, she said, it's May Day, it's a tradition. You must buy that one for those you love. You will bring them luck. Oh, Melody, that's like our May baskets, I said to my sister. Remember, I turned toward her only to catch the sight of her cloche, her little hat bobbing away once again through the crowd. She has this uncanny knack of disappearing like that, I mumbled to myself as I had gone through this with her. Yesterday, it can be so unnerving watching over an older sister. But just when I was about to get upset, she quietly nudged up to my side and pressed a small bouquet into my hands. It was such an unexpected gesture that I pressed a small clutch of white, bell-shaped flowers to my breast. They were simply lovely, as was their unforgettable perfume. I'm just going to leave it at that. So, and that's all I'm going to read of that part. And then I'm going to give you kind of an introduction to the sailing adventure. So this was kind of an unusual thing because my husband had written a memoir about our sailing adventure, and we sailed along the coast of the Côte with 2 other couples. And this was a dream come true. You know, we had planned this and he had wanted to do this all along. So we finally got this to happen. And so he had written all of this down in a memoir. And I was trying to remember, so what did we do, you know, while we were on it? And well, I took out his memoir and I thought, oh, this is pretty good. This tells me stuff. And I need stuff. So anyway, the book is written, and usually he's reading his part, but it's he said, she said. So try to bear with me, because usually you know who's who. Okay, so Winston starts out. We thank them, and this is as we're just getting onto our boat in Nice. And we've been given this wonderful, what was it, 44-foot
Yes, mile, yeah.
model. And it was perfect. It was perfect for us. And we thought we were about ready to go, and then we couldn't go because they said, oh, you can't leave yet. And they ran back and they disappeared, and he's having a heart attack because he thinks, oh my God, I didn't sign up all the right papers. What have I done wrong? You know, here we're finally ready to go. And they come running down the dock and thrust into his hand a bottle of pastis.
Oh.
You can't, no self-respecting sailor sails without pastis. You have to. So off we went.
I do know.
So then he starts out. We thanked them, started the engine, and waved au revoir. The forward chain to the dock was removed. We untied the aft dock lines and were off. I couldn't believe we were doing this. Was this a dream? Good friends, a great boat, and the beautiful Mediterranean waters ahead of us with a full week to sail. By the time we left the harbor, it was about 3 o'clock, and so a short trip to a little cove for the night was our destination. The folks at the moorings, that's the rental company or the charter company for the boats, had suggested an anchorage just about 5 miles to the east of Nice. The winds were light and easterly, so we motor sailed for an hour or so along the coast, taking in the beauty of the terraced green hills. We found a good place to anchor just off Cap Ferrat, amongst the mega yachts and weekend sailors. Well, just a second, obviously I have to get a little drink. So we're there settling in, and he's just stopped talking. Now I talk. So he said, now I say. So I'm the translator for the nauticalese. Winston took to the boat like they were old mates, and Grand Cru, the actual name of the boat, glided away from the slip, down the fairway, and through the ancient port of Nice. Why, sailors have sailed in and out of these waters for over 3,000 years, and wasn't it something that we were one of them? Ah, yes, the afternoon was filled with sunshine and lofty expectations. Our motor sail was quite relaxing, and we women sat on the bow of the boat. And lovely bow babes we were. We cruised past some of the loveliest of coastal promontories known as caps, and past the bay of Villefranche-sur-Mer. We then around the rugged Saint-Jean Cap Ferrat and headed into the bay of Malou-sur-Mer with Roquebrune, Cap Martin, and Monaco, only a few nautical miles away. But first things first, he says. It's his turn. Once we anchored, we opened the bottle of pastis as a celebratory drink, and for the first time on this trip, allowed ourselves a few moments to relax. Now, we have just flown in the day before. Haven't had much sleep, and we're now in charge. And so, here we go. And for the first time on this trip, allowed ourselves a few moments to relax. Some of our crew swam in the waters behind the boat, while others read and rested while taking in the views. We ate a leisurely dinner aboard, and everyone settled in. This time of year, the sun sets fairly late, so we watched it fade into the west. Then, like this was not magical enough, the full moon rose over the spit of land jutting out from Cap Ferrat. We were mesmerized. Moi. Yes, we anchored toward the back of the bay of Balou, amid both small and large mega yachts. It at first felt a little intimidating, but then we shed those thoughts along with our clothes and put on our swimming suits. After a celebratory sip of pastis and hors d'oeuvres, made of rich black olive tapenade, and you're going to get a lot of a lot of food, smeared onto slices of baguette. Some of us entered the water. Dived right in, we did. and came right back out, shocked at how cold the water was. "Where are we, for Pete's sake?" we shouted at each other. What were we thinking? Shortly, and I mean that very shortly, we were back out of the drink, and Karine served us an amazing meal of pasta with red sauce, and yes, more black olives. She was truly making our lives easy. But my husband was correct about being mesmerized by the moon. We all watched as the full moon splashed its golden light across the bay, and the rugged tip of Cape Ferrat was silhouetted in the afterglow. The seas were gentle, almost smooth, like dark velvet, and the anchor lights from nearby boats, as well as the village lights, which were sprinkled along the surrounding hills, wrapped about us like a mantle of diamonds. Melodramatic? Yes, but then where else could we expect to see these things? Now he talks. We all turned in for the night. The anchorage was well protected from the south and the west, where the prevailing winds flowed during this time of year. But it wasn't long before the wind began to build. My wife and I had taken the forward V-berth, and we were right below the loud noises of the halyards climbing and the anchor chain leveling. I went up on deck a few times to adjust them, but realized only had the choice of listening to humming or climbing depending on the amount of tension I put on a few of the lines. I already had the halyard tied off on the rail, but the wind was building too much to tame them. Between midnight and 2 a.m., we're not too tired. Several nearby boats decided to move at another anchorage. I decided we were all too tired, and from the snores from the aft cabins, on my way up in the companionway, to make adjustments, I confirmed I was the only one bothered by the noise, so I decided to stay put. By about 4 a.m., I decided to move to the cockpit and was joined by Carole, my lovely bride and first mate. It was a little less noisy, and we could keep a half eye on the boats around us as they were deciding to pull up anchor one by one. We told ourselves we could enjoy the stars and the setting of the full moon and settle back down and try to sleep. We were so dead tired. Mwah. Okay, my non-nautical friends, a V-berth is a cabin or bedroom up in the bow or in the front of the boat. It happens it's also right under the anchor locker, which is where some of the annoying noises were coming from. Winston did an exemplary job of trying to tame the winds, as well as quell the noise. The wind was howling, and the halyards, or the lines and ropes connected to the sails, were clanging like church bells in an emergency. So when he decided to sleep in the cockpit to keep an eye on things, I immediately scrambled up the stairs to join him. Ah, but what we witnessed, or rather heard, was another way of life on the water. You see, it was dark, as the now silvery moon had disappeared behind a bank of clouds. And because noise travels well over water, we were given a full education on how to pull up an anchor in the dark, in French. Like most frenzied and tired sailors, not all was kindness and light. No, no. Husbands and wives were stretching their marriage vows as they attempted to corral their boats and take off for a quieter anchorage. We were left behind with tiny us and all these mega yachts. They're like 150 feet long. We're 40. I suppose it was okay, he says, as the moorings had a rule that you're not supposed to move your boat during the night. Me. Before the others awakened, we slipped back down to our room to finish off a bit more sleep. I was surprised that all the commotion didn't awaken the other four. But then that had been our goal, to keep the boat and all on board safe. When I heard voices, I rose and staggered into the galley to find the coffee in the French press already half gone. How did you sleep, Sandy asked me cheerfully. I looked at her and smiled and asked her the same question. Great, I always seem to sleep so well on a boat. Right, Jim? Jim, who had gone on deck with Laurent and Karine, his coffee sloshing in his cup, shouted down to us in the galley. Great night's sleep. It was unanimous that all four had slept peacefully. I was thinking, I can hardly focus here, and I can't wait for my nap, but this was our first day of sailing, and felt Winston and I had accomplished what we had set out to do. Keep folks comfortable and feeling safe. And I'll leave it with that. Are there any questions? This was in, the first story was in 1997, the second story was in 2000, and the sailings was in 2006. Yes, and then we went in 2013 with Sequoia Yacht Club, yeah. So we'd already been there, checked it out, knew all the bads and the goods, and it was all good. So anyway, that's when that was. So it's 3 very different stories, very different ways of looking at Provence. And each time, you know, there's an adventure, food, and more sweet and charming people. So,
Not a session, but I really enjoy in your books how you weave in the history of around the food aspect of how other, you know, like the Phoenicians came, they brought their spices. The Romans were part of it, and they, you know, so all of these influences, these historical influences, are blended together to create a regional culture, if you will, a culture of food. So I really enjoy that you include that.
oh, thank you, because I have to say that, so when I took that first class in the stable, it was that particular class that they talked about the Rhone River, that I became so, I wanted to know about all of it. I wanted to know what it looked like. So then years later, Winston and I sailed down the river from the Savoring, which is the northern part of the Rhone River, down in so that we could actually see the Rhone River from all these different aspects. What did it look like? What did it look like? And of course, it's all surrounded by vineyards now, and but they have all these Roman ruins. But you know, they always talk about the Roman ruins. The truth is, the Gauls or the Celts were there long before, and they don't get the credit that they're due. That's the
Maybe
truth.
they weren't into architecture.
They were. The thing is, they don't write down history. And the conquerors always are the ones that hold the history. And so you don't hear much, unless you dig. So, any other questions? Okay.
All right, there you go, Carol. That's
Thank
good.
you. Thank you very much.